Hello, everyone. This is Martin speaking, welcoming you to the second day of the Holy Tisch Convention, Future of Food. We have a special guest today, Manuel Klarmann from Eaternity, and we're looking forward to him speaking about his point of view and Eternity's point of view on the major climate sins. Before we start, I just wanted to apologize. We had some technical issues that we resolved, luckily, and we'll just jump right into the session. Manuel will introduce himself real quickly, and then we'll switch over to his presentation and opening keynote. Good morning, Manuel.
Hi. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward. Yeah. So I'm just going to start right away. My name is Manuel Klarmann. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Eternity, and Eternity is all about establishing climate-friendly meals in society. So we have looked for the last 10 years that we can precisely measure the environmental footprint of foods and make the information available to everyone. I'm going to go forward and give my presentation, where basically the first part is the challenge that we face, how it's connected to food, and what we can do about it. So just to get started, there's a concept and a concept about how we can prevent humanity from going extinct. What are the resources? What are the things that we need to look at so we know that we can cope with the resources that we have so that many more societies and many more generations can live. And this concept is called planetary boundaries. And the planetary boundaries, there are already like three parts of the planetary boundaries that we overshoot. It's climate, it's nitrogen, and it's biodiversity. So just to give an understanding of what that means, there is if we put too much nitrogen in our soils, in our fields, in our water, we face the risk of over collapsing our ecosystem. If there's too much nitrogen in the water, like fertilizers, they will just fall over these lakes, and everything that's in that lake is going to be dead. And obviously, if it's dead, there's no food supply anymore coming out of that lake. Same goes for forests, same goes for ocean zones. When it comes to biodiversity, it's a bit more tricky to measure and to really know what's going on here. But you can kind of imagine that if all the bees are going to die, there will be no food left. So obviously, species going extinct every day, but the overall collapse of an ecosystem that kills a large swath of animals and species, that's kind of the greatest risk that we face in kind of the challenge to survive for future generations. And last but not least, obviously, the climate crisis. And how this is connected also to our food system becomes obvious if we see that all the weather crisis, if it's too hot or if there's too much rain and so on, impacts directly our agriculture. But to kind of carry the point home why we should care about the climate, there's basically measurements, most probably because of the food levels, because of the sea levels rising, that there's going to be more displacement and destruction to humankind than all human wars in history combined. It's going to be the greatest challenge that humanity ever faced. So the calculation are that there are between 200 million to about 1 billion people that need to leave their home and to migrate somewhere. And just to picture that, what that means is that if we split them fairly between the different countries, that would mean that Germany had to take about 10 to 20 million people up, provide them shelter, food, employment, and so on. That's kind of a thing, if you try to imagine it, where it doesn't really matter anymore if you're left or right on the political spectrum. There's no way that we can protect borders from so many people. We kind of want to prevent that situation. It would be really stupid not to. That's basically the reason also why so many people go on the streets. There's no planet B, and we really need to care for the future generations. And circling back to the urgency of the climate crisis, this picture is about already a few years old. We kind of only have 8 years left to cope with it and to get around the curve. And the question here is obviously, like, the point here is that we can't eat money. It's the capitalist system that is driving us in the wrong direction, but it also impacts our food system. And so a fair question that is raised by the people that go on the streets is, are we the last generation here on Earth to actually survive? And if you think about it and all the tremendous issues, and then you think, well, I can't make a difference, or as an organization, I cannot make a difference. Well, that's not the case. If you think about that, just Greta basically single-handedly started that movement. Obviously, there's like a society behind it that had like the same feelings about it, but it's obvious that a single person can make a difference, and we should do something about it. So basically, diving deeper into the aspects here between the interconnectedness of climate change and the food system, I have here a picture of the planetary boundaries in full scope. So you can see there are other boundaries that we have not overshot yet, like freshwater use, land use, the ozone. Obviously, we got that kind of like in check. But the interesting part of it is when you look at the fraction that our agricultural system plays into these boundaries. Like, what is the cause, the major cause that we're overshooting them, and what is the major cause of destruction here? And here you can see that agriculture is taking the center spot. It has most of 80% of biodiversity loss, most of the land use, water use. It's obviously the fertilizers that bring the nitrogen in the field, and it has 25% of the climate crisis worldwide. That's to be said, that's just the agricultural system. If we take the share of 25% and we package, transport, and process that food, that's about 30% of all greenhouse gas emissions originate from our food system. So just that's basically 1/3. 1/3 of the issue that we need to solve in a climate crisis is our food system. That's more than all transportation combined. That's more than all energy for living and heating combined. It's kind of taking already a major share. And if you do the calculation for Germany, where like the estimates are without gray emissions that we emit 12 tons of CO2 per person, basically our food system in Germany takes to 3 tons of CO2 per person a year. You kind of can make the calculation yourself that in order to reach the climate goals, we need to reduce at least by 2/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions in our food system. So we're at 3 tons and we need to get below 1 ton, because 1 ton is basically the goal for the whole greenhouse gas emissions that we have as a person per year. But the interesting twist about our food system is that obviously our population is going to grow and the climate system is going to impact our produce of foods. And so the projection is obviously with the advent of renewable energies, that is not just going to be 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions, but it's about to be 2/3. And like, if you didn't get it by now, that food system is at the heart and the center of the climate crisis and the survival of our human species, now you should have gotten it. But there's hope. Obviously, there's hope because we can decide right now, like at that very moment where you're listening, to choose foods that have less than 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions as we have them right now. By choosing delicious foods, by eating healthy, by even spending less money, but being within the scope of how much we need to reduce to be in line with a sustainable food future. So someone actually sat down and did the calculation what the diet looks like, so that it's within the scope of all the planetary boundaries, not the climate crisis, and it's also a healthy composition of a diet. This was Markus Springmann, that was published in Nature and later became the Eat Lancet Commission report. And here you see this nice plate with all these fractions and on all these numbers, what our diet should look like by the year 2050 globally. But if you think about Germany and its wealth, we should reach that point by 2030 because we need to be pioneering these ideas and the solutions. So this diet, just to cut it short, basically means that if we do the most, in reducing food waste, in shortening transportation, and like increasing efficiency along the whole food chain, we still need to change our diet to reduce 50 to 64% of the greenhouse gas emission by changing our dietary habits towards eating a maximum portion of red meat once a week. So there's just one piece of beef or pig, and peas, it's 100 grams that we're allowed to eat per week. There's still, like poultry, there's still chicken that we can eat one portion and fish that we can eat one portion. But we need to reduce our meat consumption, red meat consumption by 84% in comparison to what we're eating right now in Germany. Also, the milk consumption needs to go down to 250 milliliters per day. That's about 2 liters per week. That is obviously not just milk, but it's everything in cheese and yogurt and so on manufactured. So this is also a pretty large reduction, 75%. Of what we're eating right now. So if you think about that and think, well, can we change like everyone eating like this by tomorrow? No, it's obviously not possible. It's just too much of a challenge. But on the other hand, if you think about it, what we have eaten 50 to 60 years ago, you see, well, that was basically our diet. A couple of years, 2 generations before. So it's kind of a healthy diet. It's kind of a composition that could be culturally acceptable. We just need to find out like the different ways to facilitate it, to communicate it, and to raise the perception and the value of and the importance of that diet composition towards society, to make it accessible, and to have people understand that it's not just about like their personal luxury to eat a lot of meat, but there's other things at stake that we need to take care of. And that's kind of the challenge here. That's the challenge that we need to face, and where we need to call to every possible actor to do something about it. We need like restaurants to make delicious climate-friendly meals, obviously more vegan and vegetarian based. We need to have these food companies like Vegans and Beyond Meat and so on. They create substitute products that taste as delicious and kind of like fill our expectations to what we want to eat, but they're much more climate friendly. And then we need actors like politicians or like NGOs that establish the labeling of all foods and their CO2 value, and later also obviously raise a tax on carbon for food. So there are multiple actors, but we need everyone on board to create a thorough understanding of what we need to do as a society. So jumping forward to kind of understanding how these numbers come about, how these facts and that are not really debatable, there's a process that is called life cycle assessment. It's kind of this illustration where you see that there are some resources going in, some resources going on for every processes that happen on the field or even before the field. For example, when we grow a tomato. So it's really tracking back like how much energy did it cost to take the ore out of the mountain, to build that tractor, how long it had to travel on the field, and what was the yield of that carrot. And is chaining all these processes up with the resources going in, with their chemical interactions, and what is coming out, and sums them up. I mean, to be fair, it's really a lot of work just to model just one of these processes. It takes a couple of weeks. But in the end, you get this precise picture about that carrot that, for example, one carrot has 33 grams of CO2 equivalent. And now you have a number. Now you can twist also the little levers, like what happens if I reduce transportation distance, or if it's an organic carrot, how much do I actually improve? And there's 1,000 years of work if you accumulate it across these various scientists that have done that. And in the end, if you look all across these numbers, what you can find out is that there are 3 things that are of very importance that we need to care when we want a sustainable dietary composition. One thing, and I'm basically raising this because there's a lot of misconception about it, is that we need to eat seasonal and local, but it's really not intelligence to eat local if it's not in season, because the greenhouse that we need to heat for the tomatoes in Germany takes more energy than the transportation from Spain where the sun shines more. Also, what is interesting if you look at the asparagus is that it's kind of fine to get produced from overseas with a ship. It has so little impact between like the transportation distances that we need to carry locally, but it makes a big difference if something comes by airplane. what I'm basically trying to tell you here, and a lot of people kind of have it hard to grasp, is that it's kind of okay for the climate crisis to eat avocados, even if they're from far, to eat rice, even if it's from far, or ananas and mango, if they all come by ship. That's totally cool. But finally, if you look at the biggest impact, it's obviously our animal agriculture. You can see the difference between the chicken and the beef. That difference is due to the methane emissions that is coming from the ruminants, from the cow's stomach. And methane obviously has 26 times the impact of CO2. And then obviously cheese has a lot of CO2 because it's a factor of milk, and milk is coming from the cow. But to understand like basically where these emissions come from, it's the concept that if we produce food and then we feed that food to animals, there's a kind of a factor 10 to 20 of loss of resources. Like the calories and proteins that we put into the animal and then we eat the animal, there's a loss of resources. The second is the methane emissions. That is adding on top of that. So finally, obviously in the IPCC climate report that was released in August last year, it also highlighted these aspects of our agriculture towards our food system and said, well, even if we fix everything about renewable energies, if we have solar power, wind power, and so on, and we obviously reduce the biggest thing that we need to face when it comes to climate change, there's still 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions left, and they're due to cutting down rainforest and changing our land use system. Second, it's about bringing out fertilizers on the field. It doesn't matter if it's artificial or natural fertilizers, because the sun shines on it and then it dampens up. And third is the methane emissions. These are the three things that we cannot reduce in any other way than changing our diets. So coming towards kind of a practical or more understandable solution, we've built over the last 12 years a database. Actually, we have not built it, but we basically collect data points from various research institutions, private and public, and accumulate them into one database to make this whole picture feasible, to be able to calculate for every food the climate impact and also other environmental impacts. We have embedded the thing in a technology, in a software that makes it possible to also cope with the dynamic aspects of the greenhouse gas emissions. So, for example, if you look at the different routes, all the food takes and the route change because of seasonality and so on, we can basically do a kind of a Google map thing with industrial goods and look how much is the ship involved, how much do we need a truck to transport these things. And so we dynamically look at seasonalities and transportation distances and so on. Last but not least, if you look at all the impacts that are obviously going into the calculation, it starts with the rainforest deforestation has a big impact. Then you see like the evaporations from the fields of the fertilizers. Then come the methane emissions from cows, where you can also see that aquaponic systems can have a lot of methane. Also, it's not just the cow; it's also the fish that can make problems. And finally, obviously, packaging, transportation, and getting these things into the store. All of these emissions add up. And that was the spark where we started with Eaternity, where we said, hey, we want to make it accessible for everyone how much CO2 is on your plate. So you can see already on that graph, sorry, it's German, but it's the 12-year graph that I have already in that presentation for a couple of years, that there's a large fraction between like the Zürich Geschnetzeltes and the vegan lasagne. You can see that there's ample difference. It's kind of a tenfold steep, where you can choose to eat just more climate friendly. And you can even understand that it's not about like going from top to bottom just by tomorrow, but there are little steps that everyone can choose to reduce already a lot. So overall, this was the advent of the idea that we called appetite for change. So we were thinking about how we can make a software that makes this information accessible to everyone, kind of like for free or low cost, so that everyone can kind of raise to the awareness what to do to create diets that are more climate friendly, also on the single points. So this is a restaurant that you see here where we label our climate friendly foods. This is how it started. So on this graph, you see that we built kind of the software system from the bottom up with an API in mind so that it's possible that everyone who is interested, from kind of the technology companies or the bigger companies, just can connect to our system, send us recipes, send us their supply, and get all those values back on the CO2 impact of food. Basically, what that results is that you can see, if you're sitting in a restaurant and you have our system connected, you can see how much CO2 like each meal has, how you can compose a climate-friendly meal by having the insights for every ingredient, and also get the sum of all greenhouse gas emissions, not just from the recipes, but from everything that you buy, from snacks and beverages and so on, and compare that value, now about here 73 tons of CO2 per month, compare that value to all the other restaurants that we're measuring, so you can understand who is better, what they're probably doing better to improve. This gives you a number where you can see where you're currently at and how you can improve month over month in a kind of simple report that I show here. The interesting bit about that information is that we did a restaurant competition in Zurich where we let like 6 restaurants compete each other over the scope of 2 months to try to reduce as much CO2 emissions as they can, while obviously satisfying their guests. Who competed? It was the waste disposal management, it was the police department, it was the electricity office. To be fair, basically large male-based audiences here that obviously love to eat a lot of meat. But what they accomplished in 2 months is a reduction of 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions on average. And that basically means that one of them didn't do anything, and one even reduced 43% of greenhouse gas emissions in these 2 months. And on top of that, they didn't even really get started in the first month. We sent them after 1 month, we sent them the information, how they're performing, and then they try to do their best on the second month. So just to understand that, what we provided here in the competition was just the basic information, how much CO2 one meal is causing, and then we gave them about 3 hours support in like a palette of ideas, 50 ideas, how to communicate what they're doing to their guests. And the result of the 20% reduction, which is also really interesting, that basically just 1% of the 20% reduction was reduced by people choosing more climate-friendly meals. 19% was handled in the kitchen by the chefs, what they were cooking, how they composed the meals in the middle field. Well, one explained to me, I made a spaghetti bolognese, I made it vegan, and I made one with beef, but then I also made one 50-50. And just one person chose the vegan lasagna, but most people chose the one in the middle because they understood that there's something at stake here, and if we can do something, they don't need to like reduce on the. I mean, they don't need to skip the complete meal, the complete beef in the meal, but they chose like the thing that makes sense. And all the communication was basically just making it accessible to the people that they understand what's going on. All right, skip forward. So we, as I said already, we do not only measure the climate impact, but we also try to cope with the other planetary boundary concepts of deforestation, water depletion. We even included health in that sense. But the biggest catch that we did lately is that we do not only work with the restaurant industry, but we went also with the retail industry. So we started printing that score that you see right here. We printed that score. We start printing that score on various products that are in supermarket, in over 10,000 markets actually right now, so that consumers can see how much CO2 emissions are in that food that I'm currently buying. And then with these 3 little stars, it shows you 3 stars basically means we're in the goal, we're in the sustainable food system. This food is reducing more than 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions in relation to our diet. 2 means we're on the path, we're improving against the average, and 1 star basically means, yeah, that's not so cool. You're making actually the situation worse. And that is really working well. Maybe you've seen already like one of these products scored by us, but the biggest story is yet to come. So what we have done is we put 1 and 1 together. We have now a communication concept, an idea how to communicate to consumers with the Eaternity score. And we have that whole algorithms that I showed you that have been building up over the last years for the gastronomy industry. And what we did is we put those 2 things together. So we went to CodeCheck, which is an app where you can scan products and you get information about the products. And we asked them to share their database with us. And then we ran our algorithms over the whole database and did about approximately 80,000 calculations for different food items. There's some twists and some algorithms involved to actually estimate the recipes and then to It's obviously not going to be perfect on the calculation because we don't know all the facts. What we can give a pretty thorough picture of where basically almost every food is that you're purchasing in a supermarket. And in the next couple of months, this app is going to be released, and that will basically mean that everyone can just take it and scan a food product in a supermarket and find out its carbon impact and how good it actually is. We're basically democratizing the knowledge of all CO2 values for food so that people can make informed decisions. And not just some people. It's like the app is already being served information to about 2 million people. And not just those people, but we kind of open up the discussion towards all these politicians and people and narrow-minded people maybe, that it is possible right now to have the complete transparency on food items right now. There was just this Monday, there was the discussion in the Bundestag where the politicians said, yeah, we tried, and of course we want it, but it's not possible to do it. And we're just blowing that argument out of the room. We just do it, and everyone can have access to these values. So that's the biggest and most interesting piece. Just to skip forward and to finalize my presentation, this is our team. Right here, the squared pictures of our team. We're just a couple of people here in Zurich. This is all the organizations that supported us. And just to cycle back to this delicious vegan lasagna, just to remind us that food is really essential to our life. It's really essential to our culture. It's actually a social fabric of our society. If you think about it, it's about nurturing your baby or having a business dinner or celebratory. Food is like ingrained in our lives. It's ubiquitous. And just establishing that idea that this huge climate crisis that we need to face can be broken down to food, can be broken down to little steps that we can take one by one with one delicious meal at a time. Makes that problem kind of graspable, makes it possible that we can understand the pathway that we need to take with all these little steps to get towards solving the climate crisis. And the best of it is that because it's so central, food, to our society, that if we establish the value of sustainability on our food system, we also open the doors to a general understanding of sustainability and the climate crisis overall. And just that story, telling it my grandmother, she started cooking climate friendly for the whole family. If she can do it, you can do it. But overall, if you think about it, we take responsibility because we can, not because we have the duty to it. I mean, we obviously have the moral duty, but there's no job or anything delegating us to take responsibility. But we do it because we can, because there are billions of people around the planet who cannot enjoy an education like I or you did, that have no security when it comes to shelter or food, and never have access probably to learning a programming language to do these things, to make things scalable and accessible. And that kind of gives us the moral imperative to care about these problems for the rest of the world. Because finally, if we get to eat 3 times climate-friendly a meal a week, we would save. That's a Swiss. That's global graphic. We would save 1 billion tons of CO2. That is more than all electric cars, or it's more efficient than all electric cars and renewable energies. It's kind of the most easiest way to have a personal impact on yourself. So my final message is obviously that all of this can only start by yourself. So start cooking smart for the people that you love, because this is where it can start and where we can kind of create that beautiful picture of a sustainable future that we and our children all want to live in. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Manuel, for this wonderful presentation. I'm really happy that you got to introduce that, and I think it's a very important step towards empowerment. See people getting the chance to really take responsibility, like you said. We are done with this presentation, but for everyone who's joined us, the deep dive will continue right away. You will find the deep dive link either in YouTube in the description, or if you're going through the Convention Hub in the program, below the program, you will find the link. Manuel will join you there right now, and after that we have a conversation about land grabbing with Eddie Mukibi. I'm really looking forward to that as well. So I wish you a nice day, and then we see each other in a couple of minutes.